This is the Norfolk Polish Heritage Group Archive Project, and today is the 9th of November 2017. And I'm here to interview Donna Heflinger, who was born of Polish stock, and she's going to tell us her story this afternoon. Would you first of all please tell me your name and perhaps where you live these days?
Donna Heflinger, and I live in Olivone, Switzerland.
And I understand that your father was Polish.
Yes, that's correct.
Could you tell me his name, please, and perhaps when and where he was born?
Mieczysław Hasko. He was born on the 22nd of May, 1912, in Lubyanka, Ukraine.
In Ukraine?
In the Ukraine, yes.
That was at the time when the Ukraine was that not part of Poland then?
It was part of the big Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that's why he spoke German perfectly.
And of course, that changed in 1919, I think, with the Polish independence. I think yes, that's what happened. And what did he do as a young man? What was his family connection? Did he have other children?
He was the smallest of quite a big family. There were 4 boys, of which my father was the smallest, and 2 girls. His mother was also from the Ukraine. His father, Karolos Hasko, changed his name to Karol Hasko because it sounded more Polish. We believe his father was from Hungary.
Oh. And what did your father? What did his family do? What did his father's father do as
his
work?
Father? They were all in the forestry. His father was a chief forester, or lecznik, as in Poland, engineer forestry.
And do you know much about his early life in Poland?
I know that they had a very big house in Lubyanka, where my grandfather was part of this the forestry commission. My grandmother, Helena Mosiewicz, she had this very big family. They were very happy.
Fine. And so I think you know a little bit about his education. What did he do? I think he went to university, you told me.
He went to university. I'm not sure where. I'm sure my cousins in Krakow would know. He went to university and studied the engineer of aircraft construction, aircraft design and construction. Afterwards, he became a glider pilot and instructor.
So that
university.
So that would have been very good preliminary training for his life in the Air Force. I believe he joined the Polish Air Force.
He joined the Polish Air Force, but was never, unfortunately, to his great regret, was never allowed to fly because they didn't want him killed. He was too precious as a crash inspector.
And so did he do that from the very start in the Air Force as a crash inspector?
I believe so. He was never allowed to fly as a pilot.
And what do you know about his journey from Poland? Because he clearly left Poland when the Germans and Russians invaded. Do you know much about how he left Poland?
I know that the Russians arrived at the house in Lubyanka shortly after he left, burnt the house down because he'd left, blaming the family that he had been allowed to leave.
And do you know the route that he left?
We believe he left. There's conflicting stories. We believe he left via Hungary. We have letters from Hungary to say he'd been there. He got to France as he went via Italy. He got to France as France was falling. He got a boat out of Marseille as a stoker. There we believe he went to America. We have also further documents to prove that he went once to New York in 1940.
Yes, I believe you told me he actually landed in Scotland and then went on to America. Do you have any understanding why?
We have no idea, unless he wanted to join the aeronautical industry in America. That could have been one reason, because he did try to get a job after the war in the aeronautical industry, and he could only have got a job in America. And my mother was not willing to leave England.
I see. And he also travelled up to Canada, I understand.
Yes, that's what we read, but I have no knowledge of this.
He was a man of great travels.
Yes, yes.
And when he came to Britain and he joined the Polish Air Force with the RAF,
yes.
Where did he was he sent to?
Somewhere, it must have been somewhere near Fleetwood, because we lived in a caravan near Fleetwood, and my mother had a big car and used to pull the caravan around. After Fleetwood, we know he was sent to Lincoln.
So when and how did he meet your mother? What was her name?
Eileen Margaret Smith. He met her in the Derby Baths in Blackpool. My mother was a nurse, but she was working as a staff car driver for the ICI during the war.
I see, because I think Blackpool was a centre for distribution of Polish Air Force personnel and for training as well.
Yes.
And do you know approximately where he went from there?
I have really no idea. I know that he was sent all around the country as aeroplanes crashed to try and find out the reason for crashing. I have pictures of him sitting on Spitfires.
Really?
Yes.
And he eventually came to Norfolk, but was that anything to do with being in the RAF?
He came to Norfolk because my mother's sister had a house, had sold it, so she let my mother have the house, and my Aunt Doreen Manship bought a hotel, so my mother moved into the house on Beatty Road. And I remember as a child my father was still in uniform, so I don't think he was demobbed immediately.
So you say Beatty Road. Beatty Road, where is that, please?
Is in Great Yarmouth.
Oh, in Great Yarmouth. And just as an aside, do you know if your father spoke English when he came to Britain?
I don't think he spoke English very well. He will have learnt it in Blackpool. I believe they went to some form of school for Poles.
So you mentioned that his work was crash inspection.
Yes.
So would have that been for the Polish Air Force, or was it a joint thing between the Polish Air Force and the RAF? Do you know that?
I don't know. I'm not sure, because he had great connections to all his Polish friends during the war, all the other Polish pilots, and I can't really answer that.
And he did some risky travelling into Germany, I understand.
During the war, he was sent to Scotland on secret business, of which he couldn't tell my mother anything. After the war, my mother said she believes he was parachuted into Germany. As he was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he could speak German perfectly as a German. And he reported back to London about the concentration camps. Of course, the Poles were the first in the concentration camps. And I found a picture of this in the Time magazine. A picture of my father in it. Unfortunately, it's gone long lost. And I was very surprised to see my father part of 4 men who were parachuted. That's where I read about it.
And do you remember him talking about his life in the Air Force?
Never.
He never would talk about it?
He never would talk about it.
Why do you think that was?
I have no idea. Maybe because of the secrecy of some of his work.
Mm-hmm. And when he was demobbed, do you think it could have been sometime after 1948?
I believe so, because I remember as a child in the first years in Great Yarmouth, I remember sitting on his lap, and he was still in uniform, because I remember the blue-grey uniform he was wearing. So he must have been demobbed slightly afterwards. Maybe he was helping the British aeronautical industry. I really have no idea.
But
he would go to London a lot to see the Polish government in exile. Mm-hmm. General Anders, I believe the name was.
Or Sikorsky.
Sikorsky was another person
yes.
he knew very well.
Yes. He was the president in exile, I think, wasn't he?
Yes. We used to go there a lot to London.
And after the war, what brought him? Well, I think you told us he came to Norfolk because of some family connection.
Because of family. He realised that he couldn't work in England in the aircraft industry. That would have been possible only in America. So with my mother, they decided to buy a hotel. My mother had this beautiful car. I believe it was an old Rolls Royce. I have pictures of it, or a Bentley. And they sold it as down payment for a hotel, Barons Court on Norfolk Square.
And had he had any experience as a hotelier?
Absolutely no experience whatsoever, but my father was so perfect in everything he did. The knives and forks had to be absolutely square. He made a success of it. Maybe that was his downfall. He made himself ill with stress because everything had to be absolutely perfect.
And do you remember your early life in the hotel? What was your impression of living in a hotel?
It was open from Easter to October, where we couldn't go away. We all had to help. I remember as a child standing on a seat polishing taps. It was very much a family business. My mother used to cook. My father used to help serve at the tables. I used to help. And yes, it was very hard work in the summer.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, but she was born a lot later than me, 10 years later than me. My mother, unfortunately, with the stress of the work, lost 2 children between my sister and myself.
Mm. And do you remember the Barons? Was it called the Barons Court when you bought it?
No, it was owned by, I believe, by the Bullen family. It was called Barons Court because his brothers had a flat in London in Barons Court.
That's a good reason enough. And I understand that you mentioned him being a perfectionist.
Very much so.
What was the style of the hotel?
The style of the hotel was more or less Austrian rustic, I would say. Very much so. He made the television. He made a beautiful television room with an arched roof himself during the winter. He was very clever with wood. I used to help him. My mother was handwriting all the letters to people. She'd do all the sewing, sew curtains and eider-downs and everything, where Dad and I used to do the building. I learnt all my building from being a child, holding hammers and holding screwdrivers and that sort of thing. And again, perfectionist.
And why do you think he adopted an Austrian feel to the...
Because he liked that style and he felt that would do nicely in the hotel. It reminded him of his beloved Ukraine.
And in his later time in England, did he ever go back to Poland?
No, he never went back. My mother went back with Millie Pashley, who was mother of Anne Pashley, the Olympic runner. They went back to Poland. They went back to Krakow. And they met with the Archbishop of Krakow, I believe he was the Archbishop, Cardinal Wojtyla, who showed them round the church. And this wasn't long after the war. And my mother said he was such a charming man and she knew the Pope.
And had she tried to persuade him to come to Poland with her?
He had no wish to go back. His mother was dying. He used to with open arms, all the family used to come and work in the hotel. So his sisters would come, Irka and Zosha. They used to come over by train. They used to go back loaded with presents and material, and he would do what he could for his family in Poland. He'd go without himself to send things back to Poland.
But was he a proud Pole? Was he proud to be Polish?
Very nationalistic, yes, I'd say very, very proud.
And did you maintain any Polish traditions in the family? Christmas traditions? Or
not so much
like
Christmas, because Christmas we were in Germany. Yes, he would cook Polish, like placki kartoflani or golomki, and I remember my father would certainly cook Polish food.
And what did you, as a young English girl, if you like, what did you think of Polish food?
I liked it, but my father was always... Maybe I would have been happy to have had an English father because he spoke with a foreign accent and people would sort of think Hasko was not exactly a name like Smith, like my mother's name.
And so did you feel that as you felt you were unusual as a child?
I felt that I was unusual having a Polish father who with a Polish accent who couldn't drive a car.
He couldn't drive a car?
He couldn't drive a car. He said they were dangerous.
He was an aircraft
He was an aircraft
specialist.
man and would not drive a car. He never learnt to drive a car. He used to go around everywhere by bike.
And I understand that he was relatively young when he died.
Yes. Died in 1963 in Germany of a heart attack. He'd had heart problems before. It was before the age of, we call them stents. I think, is it called a stent? If he'd had that, he'd have lived another few years. He was a heavy smoker. He used to smoke and roll his own cigarettes. He had a machine where he'd roll them without a filter. And he was a very, very heavy smoker. Not a heavy drinker. He didn't touch alcohol. They will have drunk a lot. The Poles drank a lot during the war, but afterwards he never, ever touched alcohol. I never saw him drink. And
after he died, did you sell the hotel?
A year afterwards, my mother realised my sister was only 6 and she had nervous problems, and the doctor said that my sister would be an orphan if my mother didn't sell. My mother sold underpriced just to get rid of it, unfortunately. I'd got married, I was in Switzerland, I was expecting a baby. I couldn't do much either.
So what is your Swiss connection? How did that come about?
I met my husband in Norwich. He was working for 2 years in Norwich, and we met in the International Club.
And he was Swiss, was he?
He was Swiss, yes.
Yeah. And so you've been now away from Britain a long time.
I left England in 1967, yes, at the age of 21.
And what do you now today feel about your links to Poland and the Polish?
I'm very proud of it. I've just come back from Krakow. I persuaded my husband to come. I've been there myself. My husband hasn't. He thought that Putin was going to walk in any moment, so he wouldn't come with me. And he loved it. We have a very noisy family. Doctors, lawyers, they all argue politics at the table, and my husband calls the Poles the Sicilians of the North.
And what about your Polish speaking or reading or writing? Are you able to?
I can understand more or less what people are talking about. I can certainly know the difference between Polish and Russian. And I can say bits and pieces, but not good enough to make a technical conversation or a proper conversation.
And do you now maintain any Polish traditions, or has it been a little bit diluted? Or
no, I would say having lived in Switzerland so long, I keep up more English traditions in Switzerland than Polish. But I phone regularly. My cousin's in Poland. We write, we email. I know what's going on there.
And they are mainly still in the Krakow area, are they?
I have one cousin who went to, he was with Solidarność, and he moved to Austria, lives in Vienna. The rest are all in Krakow. But after the family house was burnt down, which I was talking about before, by the Soviets, they fled to Stary Sącz.
Sorry, I don't
Stary
know.
Sącz is near Zakopane.
Ah, down in the south,
Down in the very far
near the
south.
mountains,
Yes.
the Tatra Mountains.
Yes.
Well, this has been a wonderful story. There's always parts of the story that are not known, but this will be a valuable record for our archive. And I'd like to thank you, Donna, for talking to me this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Adrian, for spending your time with me. Thank you.